Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of the Talking Shop series in IF 2014. Thank you all very much for being here. We're really pleased for this first talk for it to be on the theme of creative canals. The festival this year has worked with Kaffe Matthews to commission a new piece, Lock Shift Songs, and that was the genesis for having this conversation around creative canals. I'm very pleased to hand over now to John Best, who is the chairman of the Canal Partnerships, which works with the Canal and River Trust to manage the canals. And John is going to be our chair for the next 45 minutes for this talk. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, IF 2014, for giving us this opportunity. As Bill has said, my background is partly working with the Canal and River Trust. I only look after the Southeast Waterway as a volunteer, but the Canal and River Trust, as you may know, is just about 2 years old at the moment and has taken over what used to be British Waterways and now manages it as being a citizen asset, if you like, organised differently and accountable differently as a charity. And one of the things that I'm delighted that the Canal and River Trust has been doing is developing its Arts and the Waterways programme, which over the last 2 years has engaged with over 100 artists in various programmes around the country, and that has involved over 100,000 people. So the idea that somehow the arts inherently belongs in the Waterways network is something which is completely embedded in the Canal and River Trust. And I want to take the opportunity this afternoon of exploring what are the elements and the factors that enable artistic activity or artistic experience to be encouraged and nourished on the waterways. And we're very fortunate to have two very different artists who have a particular connection with water and waterways on my left on the stage. We have Liz Pugh, who will introduce herself and her practice in a moment, who is based on a Dutch barge in the Manchester Ship Canal. And we have Kaffe Matthews, sound artist, whose installation, Lock Shift Songs, is in IF 2014 programme. And this, I think, may be the only formal opportunity that any of you have who have experienced her amazing installation to have a formal dialogue with her, ask questions, make observations. So what I'm going to do next is to, in a moment, is to invite both of them to outline what their practice is and how the waterways and the waterside experience influences their practice. Before I get onto that, I'll just say a little bit about the scale of what we're looking at. There are around 5,000 kilometres of navigable inland waterway in the UK, at least in England and Wales, and 60% of those, about 3,000 kilometres, are within the Canal and River Trust's control. Each year, there are a staggering 350 million visits to the waterway. That's each year, just to the ones managed by the Canal and River Trust. There's a huge number of people who derive benefit and have an experience they want to repeat by visiting the waterway. At the same time, there are around 35,000 boats that are registered to ply up and down for various reasons and purposes the canal system. Around 12,000 people, we think, live permanently on the waterway network. We're not sure about that, and we certainly don't know how many of those 12,000 are artists or creative people or have a creative practice or a creative hobby. That is for conjecture, but we do know there are a large number of them. So the question that we will be addressing really is, what is the relationship between creativity and the waterside and the water? What I'd like to do, once I've asked Liz and Kaffe to outline their practice, to invite questions from all of you to dig in and interrogate a little bit what that means. I'd also like to see whether within the audience there are folk who have a connection themselves with the waterway, maybe even are artistic on the waterway, and we'd like your input as well. Before we finish, I'd like to get your feedback generally, as well as those from the two beside me, on what are the sort of opportunities that you think should be further encouraged by way of artistic activity on the canals and waterways. So that's how I'm hoping to work it, but I'm very pragmatic and slightly responsive, and if you guys all want something entirely different, that'll be fine too. So now I'd like to move to the stars of the piece, starting with Liz to outline what she does, and then we'll come on to Kaffe. Liz, over to you.
Thank you, John, and hello. I run a company called Walk the Plank, and my qualifications for sitting here include living on a Dutch barge on the Manchester Ship Canal, being a qualified, efficient deckhand for the British Merchant Navy, and having set up and run a touring theatre ship. I'm probably best known for my sturdy sea legs, and I don't get seasick, but that, I think, in the context of inland waterways, is not really much of a qualification. I began living on boats as a sort of pragmatic choice, based on economics, working in the arts, not earning very much money, and not being able to afford a house, and enjoying something about the romantic notion of boat dwelling, which doesn't actually correspond to the reality of running out of water because you haven't managed to fill your tank because the hose pipe got frozen, or other such, challenges. But I think in terms of the work that I have helped to make over the years, a lot of it has been based on and around water, some of it docks and harbours, some of it canals, the inland canals, the ship canal. And I think that there is something about the choice of boats as a mode of transport being slower than cars or planes, and that interests me.
Say a bit more about what Walk the Plank do, okay. How they engage.
As a company, we work outdoors in the public realm. We often create performances or projects that engage people, communities as participants, as well as spectators. And we're often... we make work in response to particular occasions and particular locations. So last year we were working in Derry, which was the UK capital of culture, and we made a show that spanned 36 hours and began actually with a small boat that was rowed from Iona to Derry, and the arrival of a gift. It was a show called The Return of Columkille, and it involved 1,000 participants. In terms of relevant to this discussion, we have worked with British Waterways, as it used to be, creating performances and celebrations that invite people to come back to places that perhaps they've forgotten about. So a lot of... I think a lot of the canal system ended up feeling quite unloved, and then as towns and cities are starting to look again at how to connect with water, and that might be docks or it might be canals, there's reasons, people are looking for reasons to bring people back to canals and explore them as environments in which you might walk or play or live, and so we have made projects that involve structures being built on boats that are paraded around the waterways of Greater Manchester. We made a piece called Art Cargo that involved young people travelling on a narrowboat and then working with art materials to explore what canals both are and could be. We made a waterborne pageant, which was a quite challenging piece because, of course, the thing about canals are great, water's great, but there's bridges. And the thing about bridges is that you have to get under them. So whilst a pageant, you might want to build things that are very big, everything had to be collapsible. So our big dragon had to actually collapse to go under all the bridges and then be built up again. So it forced all sorts of interesting engineering challenges to the fore. How do you... Yes, we'll probably talk more about that, won't we?
Absolutely, we will. Yeah. That's great. Thank you very much, Liz. So you've heard Liz Pugh's account of the practice. We now come on to Kaffe Matthews. Kaffe, do you want to outline what you do and how you do it?
Yes. My background is one of becoming a professional musician, I suppose. In about 95, I was playing the violin, and I was not making violin music. It was violin-driven music. I was actually playing a sampler through a violin. And it was experimental music, and somehow people were enjoying it, and I was invited to make concerts all over the world non-stop. And it got to about 2005, 2004, when I went, hold on a moment, most of the people in the audience are young, white guys who either make or produce this kind of music themselves. What about the regular people on the street? How do I make this music more accessible to more people? And I'd already made a sonic armchair, which essentially was an armchair with some bass speakers under the seat and some mid-bass speakers at the back, and I made a very simple piece that was actually a recording of the inside of a transatlantic jet at midnight, you know, when you're flying back from New York. And I'd recorded this and put it in the chair, and with a couple of filters just made it loop and play against itself, and it moved up and down the chair. And people loved this. Old women and children would queue for an hour to have a ride in a chair when, in fact, if I'd played that music to them through speakers, they would have gone, give me a break, love, where's the tune, you know? So I thought, well, there's something in this. What was I doing? I was actually giving music to people through their bodies rather than just through their ears. And in fact, I think that is also how I've always experienced music, although subliminally, because as a 6-year-old I got free violin lessons in my school by chance and immediately engaged with this little wooden vibrating box that was here that gave me all this other information that I think I made my experience of music something more than just the notes. So with this armchair and this moment in around 2004, and then I was invited to make a piece in South London Gallery for a show, Her Noise, and I said, okay guys, I've made chairs, I want to make a sonic bed. So, you know, if you've got a bed, then people can lie down, so you've got the potential of a social space, and also you've got room to have lots of subwoofers, because it's 100 hertz and below, that's where we feel it, okay? So I then set about making this sonic bed, and it was one of those things where it was finished just before the show, and then when it opened we went, oh my goodness, this is doing something really interesting. And I then proceeded to make more beds, and the project Music for Bodies grew. And that was a really important part of me moving away from the stage, because I think that essentially I have been working as a musician. I'm called a sound artist now, because I'm interested in listening. I'm interested in what happens to the human experience if we shut our eyes off and actually just start to engage in our other senses, and actually predominantly the one of hearing. And so the installations continued, and then I started to want to take music outside, and I was starting to do that with bicycles. And in 2009, I was offered a residency on the Galapagos Islands. And I had said to them that I wanted to dive, because, in fact, I have a zoology degree, and I did do a lot of diving a long time ago. And I had this idea that I wanted to follow the journeys of sharks and see if I could use this information to make music. Because on the Galapagos Islands at the time, they were doing this research, tracking sharks to see if they were being affected by the growing numbers of tourists and activity in the waters and so on. And of course, what also was I doing was challenging my greatest fear, which of course was sharks. So anyway, I went off and I dived with these sharks, and it was a really important moment, I think, because it was like I'd come round full circle. You know, I come from this background of zoology. I grew up on a farm, but I'd gone right into this world of electronic music and computers. And yes, I had used a violin, but I ditched the violin, and I had lots of computers and lots of processing. And then I actually came back starting to build physical interfaces. And then I went into the water again with this project with the sharks. And I came back to London in 2009 really feeling that engagement with the environment was a really important part of what I wanted to pursue in my practice. And funnily enough, I was then invited to make a piece with rivers in Northumberland, and I chose to work with the River Tyne and made a project following the route of wild salmon when they come back from Greenland all the way up the Tyne and to Kielder water to spawn. And I found, you know, I mean, like all of us, we are now very easy to get hold of salmon, but I mean, how often does anybody ever have a piece of wild salmon? And does anybody actually really know anything about what these extraordinary animals do? And when I was a child, salmon was this luxurious thing that you would only have once a year at somebody's wedding or a funeral. And you know, now it's available everywhere, but in fact, these creatures have never been to the sea. So to actually make a work that was following this journey of this extraordinary, crazy creature that comes all the way, goes out to sea and then comes back to spawn and then probably dies, was the source of a piece of work where I received data from the Environment Agency. And I used this data, and this is, when I say data, I mean they were measuring the flow rate, the pollutants in the water, the amount of oxygen, and the numbers of salmon that were actually coming up the river. And they were taking these measurements of the numbers of salmon by simple underwater cameras. And they showed me this footage, and they showed me the amount of data they've been collecting since 1996. I went, oh my God, amazing. You could make such fantastic music out of these numbers. And then let's take this music to children in the schools up the river, and we'll write an opera. And we'll do a salmon opera. So we did. So these were two really important kind of water projects. But with both of them, they were both working directly, yes, with a specific species of fish, but actually more importantly, the energy and the flow of this natural water source. You know, the fact that all the water on this planet comes from the sky. It comes from the sky, it comes down, it flows through the rivers, it goes out to the sea, it comes up again and comes down. So then when the opportunity came to actually engage with the canals, it was like, wow, that is fascinating. That's a completely different water experience. It's a man-made, engineered structure that goes through the landscape on this specific route determined by humans rather than the water itself. Does it flow? You know, how long would it take a cup of water from the canal? Because I live in Hackney in London, and there's a canal at the bottom of my park. You know, how long would it take a bit of water from here to get up to Birmingham, you know, at the end of the ground? Will it ever get there? How long has this bit of water been here? And what on earth is at the bottom? You know, all that sludge and stuff. So, yeah, there we are, canals. And so then here we are, the Loch Shift songs, and I hope that some of you have had a chance to go and experience it. I don't know if I should say anything specifically about that.
Well,
I could
leave
pause.
it there. And I'm hoping that you're now developing questions to ask of Kaffe on the Loch Shift songs or Liz about her practice. One of the benefits of the internet is that you can go and see what people are doing and saying about their own work. So just to summarise what I've heard both of you say, what you've said yourselves about your two practices, a soundbite from Kaffe saying you're making architectural music to feel through your body as well as your ears, and that's very evident in the Loch Shift songs installation, that it is all about feeling as an all-round experience. And from Liz's point of view, you described Walk the Plank as being a team of theatre makers, pyrotechnic wizards and events engineers who develop remarkable moments that enrich the lives of audiences. And I'm assuming, unless you say otherwise, that broadly those are definitions that cover what we've heard you describe in a bit more detail. So it's now important that we have audience participation. So can I get an indication as to who has experienced Loch Shift songs so far? At the back. Oh,
Oh, great.
that's very good.
I hope you all wrote in the visitors' book.
So, who would like to ask Kaffe a question? At the back, John Highmore.
Hello there. Oops, that's loud. Yeah, my name's John. I work for the Canal and River Trust, and I enjoyed experiencing the Lock Shift songs yesterday. First of all, thank you very much for bringing this to Milton Keynes. It's lovely to have involvement with the arts through working in the Canal and River Trust. My enjoyment of the canals stems from walking the towpath, and the aspect that I enjoy in particular is letting my mind just wander freely and go off on all sorts of flights and fancy. But then when I round the corner and there's a suddenly populous bit where there are boaters or there's a lock or whatever, brings me back down to earth. And I very much found that the Lock Shift songs reflect that kind of rhythm, that experience. Is that deliberate, or is this one of the pleasurable aspects of art that I'm sort of putting my own reading onto it? Is that what you were aiming for, or is this my enjoyment and my interpretation of it?
Thanks, Kaffe.
That is your interpretation of it, and I'm absolutely delighted to hear you say that, because that's actually why I make work that doesn't tell people what to think, or hopefully it gives people an experience and a chance to have their own experiences. But I'm really interested at the same time that you say that, because I don't know if any of you have read this text, but that is one of the things that I'm using was the actual journey, the timing of the journey and the positions of the locks and the distance between them and so on, to determine when there was a pause and hover and even coming down to silence, and then this drama of action, because this was what I found walking the canal as well, that you get these moments of absolute nothing, and there might even be nobody else on the path, and then you get to a lock, and even if there's no one there, there's this noise and this drama when the gates open, and it's really violent actually when you're listening to the sound underwater. Yeah.
Other questions, observations? Yes, on the floor.
Hi, I'm just wondering, because particularly when you said about the data being given to you and you thought, oh, that's music, are you synesthetic? And I'd be interested to know whether being able to give people the experience of synesthesia, so kind of experiencing music through other senses, is part of what you're trying to do.
That's really interesting. No, I don't think I am necessarily synesthetic, because wouldn't I be seeing colour, for example, in relation to specific sounds? Yeah. Okay, but I definitely think I think visually and in terms of space rather than in terms of numbers. And funnily enough, for this piece, for the Lock Shift songs, there are 4 computers involved in that piece. So each bed has a computer, and then there's another computer at the back, which I've called the brain. And brain is not only playing the sounds in the ceiling, but brain actually tells the beds what to do. And the score that tells the beds what to do is literally just a series of numbers. Now, I really struggled with being able to write those numbers, because I've got so much else to think about in terms of the sound and the colour and the duration and the position. And so Adam Parkinson, who's my software collaborator, with this piece, the first time we've done this, I talked to him, all right, now we need this, and this is this setting, that's, pre-state number 16, and I've written all the states, and then he actually writes the numbers in. So, no, it's interesting that you say that. I'm told data, I'm offered data, and I go, ooh, music. Well, I am aware of the fact that I can do that to create melody. It's possible to do that, to create melody and rhythms. And the Salmon Project was the first time I actually did that. And in fact, the score that I wrote for this piece was not using a computer to do it, but I sat down with a piece of paper and my sketchbook and literally added things up, mental arithmetic. I didn't even use a calculator. Yeah. I got out the map and I said, okay, this lock is 11 feet and that one's 12. They're all measured in feet. That one's 13 feet. That's 7. That's this. This is this many miles. Okay, blah, blah, blah. That means that's a D. That's a G. That's an F sharp. Can't sing that high. Have to drop down an octave. And so those melodies in the Lock Shift songs have all been created through that system. So I think if I think data are melody, it's because for me, melodies are not things I normally write. I work with sound, really, and the shape and colour and texture and space and motion of it. Whereas a melody, I think, is something that is actually quite mathematical. And so if something else is going to produce those mathematics, it could produce an interesting melody. I'm always looking for things outside of my own ideas to make the material, really, actually, as source.
Thanks. Any other questions of Kaffe or of Liz?
Oh, can I just add something to that? Because I think there's something about the waterways that is about thinking about art and the waterways, how audiences experience, whether it's performance or music or whatever, once you take people outside and you invite them to walk along the canal as John does, or stand by a canal, what starts to come into play is more than just the visual sense. Yeah. You start to be aware of the smell of diesel as a narrowboat goes past, or the sound of children on bikes coming down the towpath, or those different things. And I think choosing to make work that is about places and spaces brings the audience into contact with the artist and the piece in a different way, and that's why it's powerful.
Could we dwell a bit on the idea of place and waterways and place?
Yeah.
And I'm conscious very much, Liz, that your practice is about defining an experience for an audience that is site-specific in most cases. Now, Kaffe's piece is not particularly site-specific, but it is installed in Milton Keynes, and all the choral stuff is of Milton Keynes, because that was a choir generated locally to interpret the work you'd written. So what is it that waterways can be used to do to help define place, whether it's reinterpretation or regeneration, all the different ways that this water context can relate? And Liz first, and then Kaffe.
I think there's something you were talking about, canals, the industrial context. You know, canals started from an industrial perspective. It was about moving cargo efficiently, and you know, living on the Manchester Ship Canal, which is still a working ship canal. It's not a leisure waterway. I think there's a thread around how layers of archaeology are present in canals, that is to do with the shape of the canals and the shape of the boats that are on them, connects us with a past as well as a present. And when canals thread through our landscape from, you know, if you walk along the canals of Manchester, you start in countryside and then you walk right through the heart of the city. The city is often above you or next to you, and I think that's sort of interesting, and that's what we're playing with.
That's a heritage timescale measured in centuries. I'm also interested in the micro time scale about what the experience of being within a waterways community is going to be, and I think that is also different from land-based activity. Kaffe.
Yeah, I think that there were two things specifically about the walk that I did up the canal, and one was the fact that the water slowed me right down. And I needed to do that in order to be able to do what I did and receive what was happening in the way that I did. And the second thing that was going on was, which you alluded to as well, is the fact that the canal joins places to create a route that nobody uses anymore, apart from the people who live on canals and use them. So when you stop in pubs, you chat to people, you meet people at these different places. I was only talking about the place I'd been before, And they didn't know this place, because why would they actually link this place with the place that I was now at? So I had actually walked along beside, I was very aware of the fact that I wasn't walking beside a river that had a bottom that was naturally caused by the flow of water. It was actually a tank, really, a clay-lined tank, although they're not all clay anymore, are they? But a completely different experience that, yes, had a history to it, and it had a sense of human activity, and it also took you, yes, through countryside, but it was often really noisy because you were right by the roads or the trains pretty much all the time. And then you'd come through the cities, the towns, and you'd be going through the back doors. It felt like you were always going through backyards. And that absolutely informed the work. There's no way that the Lockshift Songs would be what it is now if that walk hadn't happened. You know,
there's an
absolutely the source.
anachronism about the waterways. They're operating and exist in a context which is completely superseded now by 2 centuries of first industrialization and then post-industrialization. And I guess the role of the artist is to interpret circumstance and setting and period in a particular way.
I mean, another thing that has happened, specifically where I live in London, is that the canal, the Regent's Canal, which I walked, that's where I began my walk by my studio, and then walked along west out to where it joins the Grand Union at Paddington, and then on up and north up here. And you know, I've been walking bits of that canal since the mid-'80s, really, where it was always really kind of pretty grotty and the backs of stuff. And now it's beautifully clean and amazing apartments are built beside it. And it's all very lovely restaurants and bars. And, you know, it's the most expensive living situation. And you come into smaller places and it's still, there are odd spots where you still get a sense of what it was before, but now the canal has become a leisure path for people in cities.
But choosing to live on a boat is definitely a choice that is about going against the flow.
Yes.
Most people live in houses,
Yes.
and I think the choice to live on a boat is about, and maybe boats are also, there's something about disconnecting from land in order to look differently, to look back, to see things differently. And living on a boat is also it is a choice about an alternative lifestyle, and one that forces you to think about your footprint, to think about what mark you're making, and the transient nature of boat dwelling. There's, as you probably all know, there's a rule on the canals where you can't stay in one place for more than 2 weeks unless you've got a resident permit. And I think a lot of boat dwellers are living sort of under the radar of modern life by choice.
So do you think that in any way is linked to creativity and artistic exploration and alternative perceptions that might then be reflected in a community of people that is differently creative than the landed community, if you like?
Yes, and that, but that wasn't something that was in my in my mind when I chose to live on a boat. But yes, now clearly, yes. And I think that willingness to throw off the lines that connect you and set off on an adventure is something to do with creative practice.
So the potential...
And not necessarily knowing where you're going to end up. And the interesting thing about canals is that you sort of do know where you're going to end up. When you go to sea, you don't necessarily know where you're going to end up. So canals are sort of halfway between land and sea.
And they're very safe. You don't have to think about whether you go right or left at this junction. You just keep going. It tells you where to go. But can I pick up on that comment about living on boats and creating more creative communities? One thing that really impressed me on, I think it was about day 4 before Berkhamsted on my walk. And living in London, the number of boats now on the canal has probably tripled in terms of the numbers of people who are the numbers of boats that are there. And there do seem to be fantastic alternative lifestyles still managing to exist beside all the pret-a-mangers and everything else blossoming up around them. But when I was up in this area, and I'm sorry, embarrassed to admit that I cannot suddenly remember the name of this place. Hopefully someone will tell me, oh, it's that bit, Kaffe. There was a massive boat community that had been there since the 70s, and there was such an inspiring sense of creativity, and it felt like there was common land around up the side of the canal that the boat dwellers had taken over. And they had gardens and tables outside, and it felt like there was a small school, that there was a nursery outside, and that they had their own village that was happening because they had free land that they could inhabit in their own way. And so I would actually add that I think this thing about the possibility of in creating a more creative space is to do with space. It's to do with the fact that there's a freedom and there's a possibility to be able to not be confined by walls and to be able to move and set up alternative systems and engage with the outside world in a way that you can't when you're restricted to an urban fixed dwelling.
Many people, and I certainly include myself in them, are a believer in the mutant gene, that you're not going to get survival and evolution without people who at least explore realms of possibility that are not conventional, which is why I'm sort of pursuing this line that the subversive boat-dwelling community is actually the mutant gene that will keep us all alert, alive, excited and promoted. I want to throw it open to the audience again. Can I have an indication how many, if any of you, are boaters who either have a boat or regularly boat? At the back. And, well, there's several of you. There's three or four of you. I would love to know what your views are about your relationship with the water and whether there is an element of subversiveness in your interest in the water, whether you feel an element of alternative creativity from your relationship in the water. So all of you, perhaps one by one, can give a view.
We've been narrowboat owners for 20 years, and my husband was actually involved in the Canal and River Trust as a director or whatever they are. And we'd seen the enormous change that you had, Kath, over the years, where you'd have shopping trolleys and people would put their fences to the back of the canal. But now people have opened their gardens, and then they have little docks, and you can go down to the water. And so that's changed enormously. I think people's attitude to boating has changed enormously. It used to be kind of a rough and ready crowd, but when you're on your boat, there's quite a lot of G&T crowd as well. It's become quite posh in some ways. It really is a village on the water. When you're traveling on the canals, people, if you say, oh, did so and so come through? Oh yeah, he was here 3 days ago, and he's heading so and so, and they really know what's going on. It's I'm an American, as you can hear from my accent. I think it's one of the biggest undiscovered treasures of the UK. It's so beautiful. You can get in touch with the countryside, with the pub life, with the architecture. You can travel almost all over the UK on boats, and I just think it's the most wonderful thing, and can't wait to hear Kath's installation.
That's great. Well, the Canal and River Trust will be delighted to hear that, and the cheque will be in the post for that excellent recommendation.
And I hope that they take this to the waterways. They have canal, festivals. So you should make sure that they know you've got this installation, because I'm sure they would be interested.
What about
the one up at
Lockshift Songs? Yes.
Yeah, the Lockshift Songs.
Yes. What about subversiveness? Do you feel subversive in your life on the water?
No, we used to call some of the people water gypsies, because you can tell that there are people that are doing an alternative lifestyle. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but because my husband was very involved, unfortunately I've lost him, but because he was very involved in the admin of canals and stuff, we did used to be concerned about people who didn't pay their license. Because, there's a lot to maintain these canals, and a lot of work has gone into restoring things like the Anderton Lift. There are the 7 wonders of the waterways, and they are absolutely amazing if you ever get a chance to see the Anderton Lift or the Ponticelli Aqueduct or any of these beautiful structures that are
Barton
incredible.
Tank.
Yeah, the Blisworth Tunnel, any of these places are incredible. So if you haven't been on the canals, do go. I can highly recommend them.
Thank you very much. Well, there's very little more to say, but we will carry on for a few more minutes. Other people who have a waterway connection in the audience, just in the middle here.
not really waterway, but I have to declare an interest in that I'm a friend of Liz's, and I think that my involvement with water and people who lived on the water only really happened when I met John and Liz, which was probably about, I don't know, 17 or 18 years ago now. And I have to say that one of the attractions of it is elements of subversiveness. So it's something about freedom, it's something about fun and community, because that's where we meet up. Now I share this little wooden sailing boat, but it's at their boatyard. There's something about meeting up with friends in a big community and living that experience, which is quite simple. You know, you get up, you're outside, you have meals together, you have a drink together at night time. It's very uncommercial, it's very easygoing, there's a lot of laughter, there's a lot of spending time with your friends that you don't normally have when you're at work during the week. There's sort of that thing of no, you know, linking to subversive, what might make up subversive for me, something about not having loads of possessions. You know, it's very simple again, you just take the clothes, you know you're going to get dirty, you know you're going to get wet, you don't need loads of possessions. If you live on a boat, there's no room for loads of possessions, so it really takes all that away from you. Yeah, so I mean, I think there are elements of what I would put together to make subversiveness. You
Right.
know, you're just doing things slightly differently to do with boating, yeah?
Thank you very much. Chap at the front here. What about subversiveness or creativity for you?
Yes, they're awful. Subversiveness versus creativity. The creativity dimension is hugely interesting to me because what it seems to me to be saying is that you've got this cultural asset which is owned by the community at large, not just the boaters, because it does track back to the Industrial Revolution, which is, if you like, a common heritage theme. In terms of the engineering accomplishments, it's a fantastic story. So creativity, I do recognise. Subversiveness worries me a little bit because it seems to me that it may not be for the better good. I'd like to ask you to consider this aspect of, if you like, of what we've been talking about. What you've been portraying is the inside out. And I'd be quite interested in your views on the outside in, because I sense that within this audience there's probably quite a high proportion of people who are interested in canals and are actively interested in canals, as indeed I am, up to a point that I'm not a boater. But the world at large out there doesn't know much about the Canal and River Trust.
I think there's a Canal and River Trust issue, which I don't really want to get into today, but the waterway network as a whole is an opportunity that's out there to be. I mean, there's 350 million people who visit, 350 million visits a year to the waterway. So clearly there's a wide community that do visit and appreciate the waterway because they keep coming back. I'm conscious that we're running out of time, so I'd like to end inviting each of Liz and Kaffe to give us an indication of any ideas that they might have, a project they might like to see developing on the waterway in the next few years. There's no commitment that you then have to do it, but we'd just like to understand if there's something you're thinking about that might relate to what we've been talking about and that would be an opportunity.
Well, I suppose just picking up on what you're saying, I think there's an opportunity for artists and arts practice to encourage people to cherish and nurture things. And I think by inviting people to either notice something they didn't notice before or be part of making a celebration happen or making an event happen that links them to a waterway, that by doing that, and that might be children in a school or it might be residents, or there's ways that artists can help people remember what's there and why it matters, but also do something about repurposing and looking to the future, because actually the heritage bit is only part of it, and the important bit is what do we want these places? Why do they matter? And how do we look after them? And actually, how do we all look after them? Of course, there's a trust who will, might provide, refurbish the towpath or whatever, but actually we need everyone to care and not drop their litter there or not put the shopping trolley in the thing or whatever. So maybe it's about how artists can help communities connect with waterways and in all sorts. I mean, I'd always go for performance stuff. I'd go for music and fire and light, but that's just a personal preference.
I'll buy that. I'll buy that anytime. Kath?
I would like to make a sonic raft, and a sonic raft would be an outdoor floating multi-channel glass domed structure that would possibly begin its life in London perhaps, and it would have music made specially for it. And in its glass dome ceiling, there would be hundreds probably of tiny speakers that would be able to send rays and great swathes of sound over the top. And underneath, there would be great fat subwoofers that would vibrate, okay? And then the listening experience would be great big chairs and a vibrating platform. An audience could come and lie and listen and enjoy concerts, music made for it by local children, the local choir. We could even be streaming a concert that was happening, for example, in a concert hall, the Royal Festival Hall, some massive orchestra, and we would have specialist software on board that would shape the sound into this extraordinary surround multi-vibratory sensory experience. And then this thing, you see, could actually untie itself from the dock, and it could handle the canal, and it would then go on up to another city. Maybe it would stop in the countryside on the way, and it would have some great lights. And so essentially, I suppose, it's a community floating performance vibration space.
Wow, well, let us know when you...
Sonic Raft.
When you want to vote for it.
You heard it here.
Just to vote for it. Great. We've run out of time. I'd like to thank you all very much for your time. Do take the opportunity, even if you've seen it and experienced it already, to revisit Lockshift's songs, because it's worth a second and a third visit, different every time. And please join me in thanking Liz Pugh and Kaffe Matthews for a most entertaining 45 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, John.